privacy, and then I don't want to feed my data into some black hole out there, right? So all those are valid concerns. Once you identify the use cases, reduce the obstacles, a better way to approach implementing AI. Hello, everyone. Welcome to one more episode of Unlocking the AI Advantage podcast. And this is your host, Ramesh Danta. And today's topic is something that I think we'll keep talking for quite foreseeable time. That is about challenges in AI implementation and overcoming obstacles and resistance. Any new technology, whatever that is, ERPs and CRMs, when they first came out, so lots of challenges. And AI is no exception. And of course, AI itself has so much promise, and it has shown so many results, so that it's actually the obstacles are expected, but getting to know what they are and how to overcome is important. And to bring that discussion today, I'm excited to introduce a couple of guests and who will share their knowledge and experience to really throw light on this topic. So with that, let me bring in Grant Spradlin, VP Product Composable, and Seline Karakaya, Founder and Managing Director of Excelerate Global. So with that, let me have them introduce themselves. Grant, please go ahead and introduce.
Hey, Ramesh. Thanks. It's great to be here today. So I'm Grant Spradlin, and I lead the product at Composable. Composable is a software platform that enables enterprise teams to design, test, deploy, and operate AI solutions. So I think we have a lot to contribute to the topic today, and look forward to it.
Thanks, Grant. And then Seline.
Hi, everyone. I'm Seline Karakaya. I'm founder and managing director of Accelerate Global. My team and I work with executives and institutional investors on all types of initiatives, from strategy all the way to implementation, with companies as small as startups and as large as multi-billion-dollar institutions. The second piece of my priorities is angel investing and supporting startups as an advisor, as a mentor, and particularly focused on more women getting into technology, AI in particular, and supporting them in every capacity they need.
Thank you both. So let's get right into the discussion. And so if I look at the adoption of AI, if you ask many companies, where are you at? And quite a few of them still, they're kicking tires. And there are some use cases they may have implemented. But there are also companies who have really leveraged AI in a big way, right? And so it varies significantly, both the adoption as well as the implementation in terms of how they're progressing. So Seline, let me start with you. So what are the most common obstacles have you heard or experienced when you're talking to your ecosystem?
Yeah, interestingly, it starts at the very top. The lack of a clear strategic vision or objective for AI is really what I hear most frequently. There's common language around, what's our AI strategy? And we always go back to, well, what's your business strategy and how can AI enable that? And not just one form of AI, but all types of AI. And that really starts at the very top. The second is there's a fear around the limited AI expertise and skills within an organization. So the unknowns can be overwhelming, and there's ways to overcome that, which we'll talk about later. And then we've all heard about these security and privacy concerns that consistently come up. There are experts that can help address those. But again, going back to point number 2 around expertise and skills, that unknown makes it more challenging. And the reality is we've had, data challenges, quality data challenges at scale in all types of IT implementation in the past, in all types of technology implementation in the past. And it comes up very acutely in the AI space as well. So I would say those are the top 4. There's always the fear of cheating within an organization. And I smile when I say that, because many, many moons ago, when Excel, Quattro Pro or whatever the initial version of a spreadsheet was, or when a calculator came out, people felt like they were cheating as well. So this is just a function of time and adoption. But we're still working through that concern of, but is it cheating?
The fear of cheating is something not talked about that much, but I'll get into a little bit later. So Grant, so from a composable perspective, where you're coming from, I'm sure you're talking to a lot of customers and clients, prospects out there. So tell us, what are the obstacles that you are noticing?
Yeah, we hear about a lot of different challenges from both our prospects and our customers. I'd like to share, though, rather than give you some anecdotes based on kind of my perception, we actually conducted some research of 500 senior tech professionals just a few months back on this topic. I believe we can share the report in the chat. The research report is about the state of enterprise LLM preparedness and adoption. And what we found in that research is that there were 5 top reasons or challenges that prevented organizations from adopting these AI solutions. And the top 5 were compatibility with legacy systems, right? They're trying to infuse AI into their existing or their legacy systems. The second was security. Security was a top challenge and obstacle to getting these solutions into production. Similar with the compatibility was interoperability, right? So how easy it is for these systems to communicate with each other. And then to Celine's point, the team skills, right? The knowledge gap is a big challenge organizationally. And then the last obstacle was noted was performance. Really, is the solution performing up to the expectation of what it was originally set out to do, right? Especially when you start looking at different types of AI, predictive AI versus generative AI. Generative AI is a lot less deterministic. You get different outputs depending on how you ask the question. Even if you ask the question the same way, you can get different outputs. So it's consistency is a really important part or challenge as well with some of these solutions.
Excellent, Grant. Actually, you started this thread, which I was going to get into, the predictable AI, and then some people might call it traditional AI, and then the generative AI, right? So the debate or discussion out there is that, hey, with the ChatGPT and then GPTs really taking over, this Gen AI has taken a lot of the discussion space. So and there's also perception out there that Gen AI based use cases may be somewhat easier to implement because you have the large language models out there, with ChatGPT, GPTs, and there are others out there, right? So, what's your sense about Gen AI related or led use cases? Are they easier to implement? There are fewer obstacles. So, can you have a discussion on that, please?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think predictive AI and generative AI both are very different, and they do have similar but also some slightly different challenges too. So, for example, when you talk about things like security and compatibility, interoperability, I think those are challenges that apply to both, to all types of AI, right? Because it's about integrating into systems, the security of your data, the security of your processes. But when you get into things like team skills, I think there's actually quite a bit of a difference. For example, in the predictive AI space, that's where you see more traditional, AI roles like data scientists, where you're, collecting data, you're training custom models. On the generative AI side, these models are pre-trained. In most cases, you can do fine tuning, but in most cases, the model itself is ready to be used how it is without any additional fine tuning. And really, the skill aspect is about the explosion in the rate of technology change, and that becomes what the biggest challenge is around team skills. It's that it's so fast moving with so many different models that it's it can become a bit of an analysis paralysis. And then on top of that, it can take time to get these solutions, from ideation to something that's ready to go into production. And over that time period, things change. So being able to manage and react to that change is really critical. Where predictive AI, I think the time was baked in a lot more and understood in terms of what would need to be done to train something and then get it ready to be able to integrate it upstream into a system.
Great. Thank you. So, Celine, probably this actually leads into the one of the obstacles you mentioned, lack of a strategic vision. So it doesn't matter whether it's Gen AI, predictable AI. So if the models are already pre-trained, it's great. But if you don't have a vision, or what you want to do with that, you have a hammer, but where do you want to drive the nail? Maybe that's the thing. So, Celine, if you could just follow up on that one, please.
Yeah, I think about the distinction between official use and unofficial use. So with predictive AI, right, your organization either has the capability or it doesn't. You have access to it or you don't. On generative, there are lots of organizations that have policies against the usage of generative AI, yet individuals are using it on their own time. They're using it at home anyway. So I think adoption and interest is certainly higher than what a lot of corporations are allowing. So as that familiarity increases, the ability for an individual to request and make the case for the value of Gen AI use at work certainly increases. But I always go back to, it comes from an initiative from the top, somewhere in the C-suite, where there's an understanding or recognition that there's value to these, I'll call them tools. They're more than tools, but to these tools in our workflows, and to have a vision for what we're trying to accomplish with each of them, and to test them in a controlled setting to make the case internally certainly helps. The Gen AI adoption process certainly is easier from a timeline perspective than predictive in many ways, but it has a lot of barriers as well. So to your question, is it hype? It's not hype, but there's certainly it's taking longer in many large organizations than I would have anticipated. I use an example like I won't name names that have AI capabilities, generative AI capabilities in the product that you and I interact with every day. Yet the corporate policy is not to use Gen AI. That's a hurdle, a strategic hurdle we need to get over.
That's very interesting. So basically, what I'm getting from both of you is this, right? So if somebody were to, let's say, kick the tires just to know what it is, yeah. So you could just start with some Gen AI and just kick the tires, and then you may, as Grant said, you may not need the skill set of a data scientist or all that stuff, and then just take one use case and then probably kick the tires. But still, for any large scale implementation, you still need to have, what is the business case, right? So why you want to do it, what you're trying to do. So the next question in this one is, so Celine, just continuing on that one, let me ask you this question. There seem like a customer experience management or some use cases that are out there that are probably easier to implement. And so are there any use cases that you could mention that have less friction to implement?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of examples. One is you called customer experience management, customer service, any area that is only one step removed from the status quo, from something like a chat bot to an AI-driven solution, seems to be easier to implement than something that is multiple steps. The second is if there's sensitive data, customer identifiable data, financial data, anytime there's an additional level of sensitivity, I think the barriers, the bar is a lot higher. So the areas we see the most adoption is in areas like customer service, and then simple content generation, whether that's within a marketing department, whether that is something a little bit more business oriented in that you're trying to improve language on a presentation, for instance. Those are the areas that we see embedded AI tools that people are starting to tap into. Think about the access folks have with Microsoft today and so forth, as well as Google. So those are the lower hanging opportunities that are seeing far more traction. It's not that the obstacles don't apply here. It just the friction is a lot lower because of that familiarity. It's the extension of tools they trust and are familiar with. And the business implications of using the tools feel less. And I say feel because in reality, There could be sensitive information in all aspects of the work that we do, but they feel less risky to many. Whether perception or reality, having a place to start is never a bad thing, though. As I say, familiarity and comfort with these tools is a great place to begin. And some adoption, some narrow adoption, is better than none at all. So I'm personally encouraged.
Great. So Grant, so Composable, your company that you work for, is a middle layer to reduce the friction for adoption, right? So of AI. So given that, what kinds of use cases are seen as the low-hanging fruits from the people that you're working with?
Yeah, so I guess first off, I couldn't agree with Seline more in terms of where the easier adoption is, and I think it ties into your question, Ramesh, about kind of a platform and doing business specific tasks. It really depends about the workflow and where you're integrating AI into the workflow. So, for example, in your content creation example, right, the interaction might be very simply someone going into ChatGPT with their text and getting a refined version of the text that they want, right? Or doing a spell check, or generating a blog post, and so that's a very light integration into the workflow. Where my company focuses as an AI software platform is more into automating business processes and automating and augmenting processes within applications. So those steps within those workflows are a lot more they're a lot more embedded. They're a lot more ingrained. It's in the application that you're using. It's in the steps that you take. So that's where we see there's more effort for folks to take these different frameworks, take these different tools to create an end-all solution. And so the solutions, though, that we're seeing, honestly, there isn't one solution that's easier that's easier than others. It really depends on how embedded and how deep in your workflow it goes. That's where we're seeing where the effort is spent, but that's also where we're seeing where the value is proven, right? So back to what Seline was talking about with the ROI, right? If you do integration into a business process and there's not a strong ROI behind it, you might spend just as much effort to get much lower value. So we always recommend looking at very high value use cases when you're looking at doing a deeper integration to augment business process within applications. And we actually have like I mentioned, we had research. We also have a white paper about that too, which is about how to evaluate what are good or bad use cases, and is really dependent on time and value. Those are really the two vectors that you need to look at when making a choice of which use case to pursue.
Great. Hey, so with that, so we laid the groundwork with the obstacles and things that we have seen, and we are beginning to get into some tips about how to get started, having a business case, and then what are the use cases that you could implement aspect of it. So let me get into the next section, which is what are the strategies that we could suggest based on experience to reducing the friction and get it going. With respect to strategies, right? So because we did mention security as one of the obstacles that came across from your research, Grant, and also Seline, you mentioned as well. So what are the some of the tips or things that you could suggest to mitigate the concerns and prepare and take some measures to about the security? And then Grant, let me start with you. You started talking about it.
Yeah, sure. So security is a broad topic. I'd also expand that into things like regulatory and compliance related concerns. A lot of times that gets lumped in with security, and it's the challenge is that when you're integrating with AI, right, it's not necessarily about the security of the AI, it's about the security of your data that's being used with the AI, right? That's typically where the security concerns or the regulatory or compliance concerns come in. It's about how will the data be used, who has access to use that data, and what's the output. And so from our perspective, those are the things that you need to be thinking about when creating solutions that automate or augment business processes with business sensitive data, right? So it's one thing, again, if you're generating, a blog post using ChatGPT just based on, non-sensitive input. But then if you're going to do, build an augmentation or an automation within your application, so let's say a contract review, right? You want to review a private business contract against your internal policy, right? That's something where it's sensitive data, and you need to know who's able to access that application, who's able to run that service, who's able to make a decision based on that information. Because in that case, it's not necessarily like the AI is doing the decision making, but generally it's as like a co-pilot. So to provide someone with the information to provide better decision making or quicker decision making. So it's really about who has access to the data to perform the normal job function. And those are the people that need to have access to the services, the AI services that are going to use that data to perform their job. But you need to think about that from the beginning, because if you just, think you're going to, do a contract review, using, ChatGPT, then that would be a big security error, because that's actually an application. That application has memory and it's going to remember your sensitive information. So you need to have more internal controls and have internal security and internal observability over who's using those services and that data.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see that any different from a typical governance that you have to do for any of the projects anyway. Seline, you mentioned an example where the company has told employees not to do Gen AI because they're feeding in the information to the Gen AI. So does it fall under this kind of a concern? And then if so, then how? What's your advice to companies to mitigate these kind of concerns?
So I think to an extent it does, and Grant said it well. In part, I believe this company was ready for a commercial product before they were ready with their own data governance policies internally and use policies internally, which feels counterintuitive to, I imagine, many listening to this. But that does happen all the time, right? And data governance is incredibly important, having strict AI ethics policies and maintaining transparency and communication around those, critically important. Where I lean as, human in the loop. You don't want your AI as the decision maker or the decision output, but rather the co-pilot. How do we make better decisions more quickly and efficiently with AI as a co-pilot, being able to really enhance our own human ability, right, to lead, to decide, to problem solve. And I think that's one important way to be able to manage both the real and the perceived risk. But I think it ultimately comes down to good systems being able to track, measure against your governance policies as well. And you need folks like Grant and his team that are real experts in trying to establish not just the high-level policies, which the executive team can do, but translate that into specific solutions within the organization that ensure that you can live up to those standards, live up to those policies. So I think part of it is a function of time, and then part of it is a function of education, right? If the teams are clear on how they can manage, they can mitigate risk, I think they're willing to do it. I think the access to that knowledge base still is not as pervasive as it needs to be. It really does start with a chief technology officer of these larger organizations. And I think we're getting closer, much closer. And I expect big changes here in 25.
So great. So can we give examples? We talked about, predictive AI or traditional AI and Gen AI. So can we give examples of, what goes into, which one? And let me start with, so the primary difference, one of the primary differences is that Gen AI generates data, right? It's just not relying only on the trained the data, but also can generate. Right. So the Grant, I will give you the opportunity to start off this discussion about any examples that you could give where predictable AI versus Gen AI are being differentiated.
Yeah, so I come from a content management background.
Okay.
And so one thing that happens very frequently in content management is, you have a digital asset, you have a file, and you need to tag it with metadata. And that tagging, of metadata helps inform systems. What type of document is it? What's it about? What's in it? So that's traditionally been a very human-oriented task. You have people like asset managers, digital librarians that do these roles. And then when predictive AI came along, and we actually did this, my previous company, did this, is we would use predictive AI to train an AI model of what attributes, what metadata would accompany what types of images. So for example, if we have an image of a shirt, right? And then we need to tell it, hey, this is a shirt. And if we have an image of pants, this is pants, right? This is a real retail example, right? So you need to feed it the information to train the model to then predict what it is. So if I give it an image, does it know is it a shirt or is it pants, right? Yeah. So that would be an example of predictive AI. Basically, you need to give the model, that you have to give the AI the data to train it to then be able to predict the same thing against new data that it hasn't seen before. Generative AI can do the same thing, but it doesn't need to be trained the same way as predictive AI because these AI models have been pre-trained. So now, for example, with a vision-based language model, I can give it an image of a shirt. I can give it an image of pants, and it can tell me what's shirts and what's pants. So you get the same outcome of tagging or labeling these images, but how you got there is very different. It's upfront training based on very specific data to then predict the next one, versus generative it's all pre-trained and generalized, and you don't need to spend time up front to do the training.
Right. So got it. So I also heard, like, for example, drug discovery is also an example where new proteins or new new drugs could be discovered, again, using a Gen AI as well. So Seline, in your portfolio of companies, you're a prolific investor and looking at lots of deal flow as well. So what kind of examples have you seen where the Gen AI versus predictable AI are being used?
I think as companies are developing product and solutions, I prefer to call them solutions. I don't think they're necessarily drawing these hardline distinctions, right? They have a use case or a problem to solve.
Yeah.
Whatever technology they need to solve that problem is what they will adopt. And the reason I call that out is there is a predictability to more traditional forms of AI than there is generative. There's an unpredictability to the output of generative AI that can be challenging. It can be powerful in some scenarios, but it could be challenging in others. So I'll give you an example. One of the companies I'm working with now is called MyTown AI. They're trying to enable smaller local governments to make decisions more quickly, more efficiently around all sorts of citizen-facing needs, whether that is permitting and licensing to decisions around impact analysis and what happens if you put a new business in a certain location, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very interesting concept. Because as they develop product, I don't think they're necessarily thinking about these hardline distinctions, and rather thinking what's going to better solve that business need, that governments need, government agencies need to be able to get 30%, 40% faster at being able to issue the licenses, for instance. I think from a layman's standpoint, which many of those interacting with AI are, it's a question of how do I interact with this capability? Is there a whole host of things running in the background, or am I directing it? If I'm directing it, how good do my inputs need to be, my queries need to be, my requests need to be to get the right type of output? So that's a piece I'd love to talk about at some point, because initially with Gen AI, that mattered quite. Called it prompt engineering. I think today the need for that is far more limited, which makes kind of the potential use cases far more ubiquitous without that additional kind of heavy lift and training on how to query, how to ask questions, and so forth.
It's great. So actually, that I think that the area that you want to discuss, we'll get into that in the next section for sure. So can we have a completely self-contained AI model, one that you train with your own data that would never be extended to the organization? So I could clearly see where this is coming from, where companies are, concerned about giving their data to outside the organizations. So their the preference is to have an engine, right? Models that they could probably off the shelf get it, but the data is all contained. And I have seen implementations of this kind of model, but let me start with Grant. So are there options available for companies where they only rely on the models from off the shelf, but the data is all contained within the organization?
Yes. So the answer to both questions is yes and yes. First of all, when you're using predictive AI, you're using your data to create a model. So that's certainly self-contained. Generative AI, generally, you're starting with a pre-trained model that does general reasoning. It's been trained on a large variety of knowledge, and you can further train it as a custom model using your business data. That's called fine-tuning. But Ramesh, to your point, most of the cases, 99% of the time, you don't need to do that. What's key is giving that AI model, the generative AI model, both the right prompt that Seline was talking about, that's the prompt engineering, combined with the right business data. If you can give the right prompt and the right business data, in most cases, these models can give you the output that you're looking for without training the model with your business data. So it's kind of like giving the model the right data at the right time for the right question or the right prompt, where it doesn't need to be pre-trained.
Okay, so that's good. So excellent. So now we are about 36 minutes into the discussion. So now let's get into the examples of use cases and case studies where things have taken place. Because if we keep talking about the obstacles and then roadblocks and how to overcome, we will never get to a place where are there actually use cases where the AI has been adopted in whatever form or function. So with that, so let me start with Seline. Seline, can you start this particular section with some case studies that examples that you have seen in the market?
Yeah, well, one that I've seen repeatedly and is gaining considerable traction is AI-enabled, AI-assisted transcription services across all types of industries, but particularly in medicine, whether that is in dental, whether that's in a GP's office, whether it's veterinary medicine. There's some really exciting companies that are helping build efficiencies into that call it soap note taking process in a medical setting. And that's a use case I like quite a bit, because it's not replacing the human in any capacity. It's addressing a very specific pain point around redundancies, inefficiencies, and the type of work that keeps medical professionals, whether it's a physician, a tech, or so forth, in the office after hours to clean up notes, to tighten up notes. The second thing it does is it has a nice way of synthesizing this ultra medical, ultra technical data into understandable summaries that you and I, who are not medical professionals, can understand, right? It's not just a synthesis of ultra technical terms and numbers with diagnostics, but something that has implications that I can take away and say, okay, here's what I need to know from the data and from my visit. And it's a great example of using technology as what I call to superpower, not only the practitioner in this case, but really enable the patient as well. I'd love to see more examples like that. There's, of course, compliance, regulatory, all sorts of considerations that the industry is working through. So I won't say it's a low risk or not a challenging application, but an important one that I think creates tremendous value.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one to discuss. For me as a user, for example, when I record stuff on Zoom or StreamYards like this, at the end of the discussion, I get a summary of the discussion, right? So previously, somebody sitting there taking notes and all that stuff, and then we don't need to do that. So I could see this use case in a non-medical setting as well, extremely useful. And the summary is actually, it's very, very accurate. And then I didn't have to modify that at all. So it's a great example. So Grant, what are the examples that you could start us off in this section?
Yeah, I can maybe give some examples that are similar to what Seline was talking about. So if you think about any context where people are doing manually intensive human review tasks, right? It could be like I mentioned about a contract review. It could be reviewing a claim, a health insurance claim against a policy, or an auto insurance claim, or any type of claim. It could be reviewing a proposal and then scoring it. So any time where you have people taking in large amounts of information, could be one file, could be across many pieces of content, but basically you have some business specific content where a person needs to manually review it. So sometimes these tasks can be reviewing hundreds of pages of content, and it's really manually intensive, and it's also ripe for human bias and human error. So taking those types of tasks and basically having our AI models, essentially read the content and then perform the task. It could be summarizing part of the content. It could be labeling it. It could be, classifying it. It could be, asking to analyze it and to find some outcome. It could be scoring it. So for example, if you have a policy, you have a rubric, you have some type of scoring guideline, anywhere where you have a defined guideline that you can apply against your business content, that's a really great use case, and actually a pretty low effort use case to use AI for. And it vastly benefits the people doing that work because they can do the work much more efficiently, and they can get the information that they need, much more quicker without kind of the brain drain that happens.
Great. So another example, Seline, you mentioned in preparing for this webinar is decision tools and AI enhanced decision making in resource constrained environments. Can you talk a little bit more about what is the actual use case on that?
Yeah, I think Grant alluded to it, and I mentioned smaller local governments earlier. So
okay.
Again, the concept around what MyTown AI is building is creating a repository, creating a tool where the very limited resources in a small town government, most of whom are volunteers, some employees, but most of whom are volunteers, have access to information that could be changing on a yearly basis, that can be evolving. There's a wealth of information, dozens and dozens of documents that have standards and policies and regulations and so forth. And bringing it all together so somebody like you or myself, who may be on a city council, can tap into that resource and be able to make decisions in hours or more quickly rather than days or weeks, which is what it takes today. I mean, it's a very powerful example because all of those resources exist in the public domain. There's nothing private about it, but there's thousands and thousands of pages of information. And to be able to make decisions from that information is very challenging and very inconsistent, by the way. Imagine you want to start a store in a small town at the end of Main Street, right? And somebody 2 doors down tries to do that, and you get two dramatically different answers because of human interpretation, human error, a lack of a feasibility analysis, whatever it may be. I think these are, I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit, but ripe opportunities for solutions that have very clear impact in terms of cost, in terms of time, and also in terms of citizen satisfaction. I mean, imagine these markets where it takes months to get a permit to do the most basic of renovations to a commercial building or even a residential. And imagine being able to get that within a week to 10 days or even shorter. So I would say get creative around what problems you're trying to solve and see how AI can help you do it. Because the AI enhanced decision making really helps you shine in whatever role you're in. Government officials get a lot of heat, right? So if they can delight their constituents, I think it's a very nice way for them to be supporting their communities rather than being gatekeepers for big investments and decisions within those communities.
So that's interesting, Seline. I'm pretty closely aligned with the town that I live in. The government is generally seen, right, that they're late adopters to this technology, but you're bringing an excellent example of where they don't have to be late to adopt, especially AI, and in a limited fashion.
There, right? If these technologies are built by people who have been on the challenged end, on the receiving end of the heat, so whether they've been formerly mayors or on a city council or acutely understand the pain point, it's also a different relationship when you're building a product and also selling that product. So somebody like you, for instance, who acutely understands that need is really well positioned to build something that really works. So I like the intersection of AI making us all technologists, all innovators, if we choose to be.
Sure, I'll follow up with you separately on this one. Question is about any use cases implementing AI agents or swarms. So Grant.
Yeah, so all of the use cases that we're talking about could be implemented using an AI agent. The AI agent represents the level of sophistication in the automation, acting on its own without needing the human in the loop. So, for example, if we talk about that contract review, then I think most organizations, doing some type of review against a policy, it's about their comfort level. It's about where they are as an organization, right, and how confident they are in the data and their exception processing too. So I think in most cases you see organizations starting with the human in the loop and validating the output. But as we see more adoption on more use cases, I think we'll see that transition into more autonomous agents or acting with other agents. So for example, if now we have a policy review agent that reviews the policy against a contract or any other data input, we'll probably have another agent acting as a gatekeeper or a checker against that agent. So a contract compliance agent, right? So essentially you need to start having agents that are fulfilling the human aspect of the process to complement the checks and the balances, because there's not going to be, at least for I think the short term, there's not going to be one Uber agent that does everything. The agent has to be specialized in a task, and that's how you know that it's you're going to get the quality output that you're expecting. So it's really about where you are on that evolution of going from kind of co-pilot to full automation. Because once you're automating, you're now having an agent.
So great. Okay. So now we have about, I would say 12 minutes or so. So I'll ask one last question and then we'll get into concluding thoughts. And so actually, Grant, let me start with you. One of the things that we talked about is there if somebody asks a question, hey, do you have a manual? Do you have a white paper? Do you have something, for me to follow, for me to implement AI, right? So do you have some steps that you could talk about so that will, reduce the obstacles, a better way to approach implementing AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned about our white paper about how to identify and select the best AI use cases for your business. It's always going to be business contextual. There's no right or wrong answer. So I think that's a good starting point because, to Celine's earlier point, you need to have a strategy. You need to know about what's achievable, what's going to give value in your organization. And of course, that's going to be the place to start. But now as you get started going from ideation to into the actual implementation, the actual solutions, that's where you're going to encounter a lot of the challenges that we talked about earlier. And that's where you hear about a lot of things in the news or in the media where a lot of these solutions aren't getting into production. For that, Gartner recommends a composable platform architecture. So having the right tools, the right infrastructure in place to be able to not just solve one solution for one use case, but after you do that one, you're going to look at the next one and the next one and the next one. So there are platforms and tools that can help with the rapid ideation, proving out, is this use case good? Can I get the output that I want? But then using that to transition into, well, how am I going to operate in production? How am I going to be able to know who did what, where, when, to have, to mitigate those security concerns as well. So I'm very much a believer, maybe I'm biased because this is what my company does, but I'm very much a believer in taking a platform approach to rolling out these generative AI solutions because it provides a more repeatable way to implement and adopt them across the company.
Great. So, Seline, how about you? The vantage point that you come from, it's not offering a particular product or solution, but you work with many companies out there. So, if a company comes to you and say, "Hey, I would like to, get started with AI," so what do you suggest? So, is there a process, a methodology that you would advocate?
Yeah, getting teams familiar and comfortable with AI in general, right? Just let's forget the implementation and strategy and business decisions. For those, there are two resources I lean on. One is the content pulled together in the programs that a group called Women Defining AI, which I'm a part of, has, and another organization called Almost Technical has. Very inexpensive, or in some cases, free solutions to get folks more comfortable with what the various types of AI is, how Gen AI works, doing very controlled experiments to see how far you can push your own thinking and use cases. And we really want folks to start experimenting and building in many cases with both Women Defining AI and Almost Technical. From a business standpoint, right, Coursera in particular has wonderful content around how senior executives should be thinking about AI. And they've got some structures in place to help you think about strategy, business needs, how to apply AI to solve those problems. So there's plenty of resources out there that we can link to. Choosing a couple, right? Not drinking through that fire hose, but choosing a couple to follow is a great place to start. And then partnering with your technology organization and technology partners, organizations like grants, is a very nice way of trying to understand what you don't quite know and starting an implementation, potentially in a very controlled, narrow way to solve one business problem. You're not going to solve this on your own, right?
No.
AI implementation is not something you're going to do sitting in a corner somewhere in the office. You're going to have to use and leverage experts. And I would say, choose one or two that you trust and ideate with them, problem solve with them. I think more often than not, we'll be delighted when we work with folks who have the experience 10 times over, 100 times over. I'll stop there.
Okay, so great. So the thing that really I like about today's webinar is that there are perceptions out there that AI is difficult to implement, and I need data scientists. So lots of them, but there are ways that you could mitigate this, and then of course other concerns like privacy, and then I don't want to feed my data into some black hole out there, right? So all those are valid concerns, but once you identify the use cases, right? So what are the things that you really want, what problems you want to solve? This is no different from any technology, right? What's the problem you want to solve? And then you use that as a starting point. There are easier ways, there are ways that you could get started, right? On the other hand, I also have seen organizations where they do not have a use case per se, but they just don't want to skip this, right? So they want to get started somewhere. They want to kick the tires. So those options are also available for you off the shelf. You just take it there and then just kick the tires and then get your employees and educated and then informed about what's going on. And in the process, you might come up with a use case that you could apply any new technology. In this case, we're talking about AI. So with that, thank you very much for staying with us, Grant and Seline. It's a fantastic discussion today. Appreciate your inputs.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.